Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really crucial set of documents here, essentially the blueprint for India's environmental laws, rooted right in the Constitution and key legislation.
That's right. And our mission today is, well, to decode this. We want to show you exactly how environmental governance is structured, who holds the power, from the very top right down to the village level.
To protect our air, water, forests, all of it.
Precisely. And this isn't just about listing laws. We're digging into the philosophy behind it all, how the Constitution views the environment, and how that translates, or sometimes doesn't, into action on the ground. We're moving from duties to actual acts.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're looking for those aha moments, trying to understand how these big national policies actually interact with what's needed locally, and maybe where the friction points are.
Right. So before we jump into specific acts like the EPA or forest conservation, we really need to start with the Constitution itself. It kind of sets the stage, the ethical tone, doesn't it? Absolutely. It lays the groundwork. The Constitution establishes the core principles, the legal basis for everything that follows regarding environmental protection.
So what are those key articles, the ones that guide both the government, the state, and us, the citizens?
Well, the framework really rests on two main pillars. There's a responsibility placed on the state, found in the Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSPs, and then there's a duty placed squarely on every citizen, which is in fundamental duties.
Okay, let's take the state's role first. How do the DPSPs direct the government when it comes to the environment?
So the key one here is Article 48A. It explicitly says, and this is important, that the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forests and wildlife of the country.
Endeavor. That word sounds a bit aspirational.
It is, in a legal sense. DPSPs are guidelines fundamental to the governance of the country, but generally you can't sue the government directly just based on a DPSP if they don't, say, protect a specific forest. They're non-justiciable, mostly. They provide the moral, the political direction.
Right. Non-justiciable. That's a crucial distinction for aspirants to remember. So it sets the direction, but maybe it lacks immediate legal teeth on its own. What about the citizen side of the equation?
That's where Article 51AG comes in. This is part of the fundamental duties added later by the 42nd Amendment, same time as 48A, actually, and it's much more direct.
How so?
It states it is the duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. See, it's not an endeavor, it's a duty. It makes environmental protection a responsibility for everyone.
Okay, so the state should try to protect and the citizen must protect. But like you said, duties and directives can sometimes feel a bit like soft law. How did this whole area gain real, enforceable legal power? The kind that lets people demand action?
That's where the judiciary comes in. This is probably one of the most significant developments in Indian environmental law, driven by judicial activism over decades. The courts basically connected the dots.
Connected what dots?
They recognized that a degraded environment, polluted air, contaminated water, it directly impacts a person's ability to live a healthy life. So they started interpreting the right to a healthy environment as being implicitly part of the fundamental right to life under Article 21.
Ah, Article 21, the big one.
Yeah.
And that is a fundamental right, fully enforceable.
Exactly. That was the game changer. Suddenly, severe environmental damage wasn't just bad policy. It could be seen as a violation of the most basic right guaranteed by the Constitution.
So if pollution is threatening your health, you can actually go to court and argue your fundamental right to life is being violated.
Precisely. This interpretation opened the door for public interest litigations, PILs, allowing citizens and groups to approach the high courts or even the Supreme Court directly to compel government action on environmental issues. It effectively gave teeth to that aspirational goal in Article 48A.
That's quite an evolution. From a non-justiciable endeavor to a judicially enforced fundamental right. Did this lead to any specific changes in how environmental cases are handled?
Yes, it did. A major outcome was the creation of a specialized body. The National Green Tribunal Act of 2010 was passed, establishing the NGT.
The NGT, right. We hear a lot about its rulings.
And the act itself explicitly states it was enacted in consonance with that right to a healthy environment, linked to Article 21. The idea was to have a dedicated expert body for speedy disposal of environmental cases handling disputes, awarding compensation, ensuring enforcement. It put administrative muscle behind the constitutional and judicial developments.
Fascinating. So a DPSP and a fundamental duty provide the ethical core, but it's Article 21, expanded by the courts and then operationalized by things like the NGT Act, that gives environmental protection its real legal force.
Okay, let's switch gears from the why, the duties and rights to the how. How is the power to actually make laws about the environment divided up in India's federal system? Environment touches everything, so who gets to legislate?
That's where the seventh schedule of the Constitution comes in. It's basically the rule book that divides lawmaking powers between the union government and the state governments. It has those three lists, right?
Correct. List 1 is the union list only parliament can make laws on these subjects. List 2 is the state list only state legislatures usually can. And list 3 is the concurrent list, where both parliament and state legislatures can make laws.
So where does the environment fit into this? It seems like it would cut across all three.
It absolutely does, which is part of the complexity. Let's look at the union list, list 1 first. There are several entries relevant to the environment, even if they don't explicitly say environment.
Like what? What powers does the center hold exclusively?
Well, think big picture strategic things. For instance, Entry 52 deals with industries declared by Parliament to be necessary for defense or, importantly, for the public interest. Entry 53 covers regulation of oil fields and mineral oil resources. Entry 54 is crucial. Regulation of mines and mineral development to the extent Parliament declares it in the public interest.
Ah, so major mining regulations come from the center?
Largely, yes. Then you have Entry 56, regulation and development of interstate rivers and river valleys if Parliament deems it expedient in the public interest. That's key for water disputes. And Entry 57, fishing and fisheries beyond territorial waters. Also, things like atomic energy, Entry 6, and major ports, Entry 27, have clear environmental dimensions controlled by the union.
Okay, so the union handles the really large-scale stuff, strategic resources, interstate issues. What's left for the states then under List 2, State List?
The states traditionally handle things closer to the ground, more localized issues. For example, Entry 6 is public health and sanitation. That directly impacts waste management, local pollution control. Entry 14 covers agriculture, including protection against pests. Entry 17 is very important. Water, that is water supplies, irrigation, canals, drainage, water storage, subject to the provisions of Entry 56 of List I, the interstate rivers bit.
So states manage water within their borders unless it becomes an interstate issue the center needs to regulate.
Broadly speaking, yes. Also on the state list. Entry 18 deals with land, including land improvement and soil conservation. Entry 21 covers fisheries within the state. Entry 23 is regulation of mines and mineral development, but this is subject to the provisions of List 2 with respect to regulation under the control of the union. So states have a role, but it's subordinate to central regulation for major minerals.
It sounds like a recipe for overlap and potential conflict, especially on mining.
It certainly can be. And that brings us to List 3, the concurrent list. This is where things get really interesting for environmental law because both the center and the states can legislate.
What are the key environmental entries here?
This list is critical. Entry 17A is forests. Entry 17B is protection of wild animals and birds. Entry 20 deals with economic and social planning, which we touched on earlier. Its scope is huge for environmental impact assessment and development projects.
Wait, forests and wildlife protection are concurrent? I thought you mentioned earlier that wildlife protection initially needed special constitutional articles because it was on the state list.
Excellent point. You're remembering correctly. Originally, forests and wildlife were on the state list, List 2. This made it very difficult for the Parliament to enact uniform national laws like the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 without jumping through hoops like Article 252, getting states to request central legislation.
So what changed?
The 42nd Amendment Act of 1976. It was a major constitutional overhaul, and one of the key changes was moving 5 subjects from the state list to the concurrent list. 2 of those were forests, making it 17A, and protection of wild animals and birds, making it 17B.
Ah, okay. So now both the center and states can make laws on forests and wildlife. What happens if their laws conflict? Say, Parliament passes a strict forest conservation law, but a state wants a slightly different approach.
That's a classic concurrent list issue. The Constitution provides a rule, generally under Article 254. If there's a conflict between a union law and a state law on a concurrent subject, the union law prevails. The state law, to the extent of the inconsistency, becomes void.
So the center's law usually has the final say on things like forests and wildlife now.
Usually, yes. There's a small exception. If the state law was reserved for the consideration of the president and received his assent, then the state law can prevail in that state. But even then, Parliament can still enact a future law that overrides the state law. So, practically speaking, the center has the upper hand in setting national standards for these concurrent environmental subjects.
That 42nd Amendment shift seems fundamental then, enabling acts like the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, which really centralized forest management.
Absolutely. Placing forests and wildlife in the concurrent list was crucial for creating strong, uniform national conservation policies. It reflects the understanding that these issues often transcend state boundaries and require a coordinated national approach.
Okay, we've mapped the center-state power division, but environmental problems, waste, water, local forests, they hit people where they live. So the Constitution also pushed for decentralization, right? Bringing power down to local bodies.
Exactly. That was the core idea behind the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts of 1992. They aimed to empower local self-government institutions, panchayats in rural areas, and municipalities in urban areas.
And they did this by adding new schedules to the Constitution.
Correct. The 73rd Amendment added the 11th schedule, which lists powers and responsibilities that could be devolved to panchayats. The 74th Amendment added the 12th schedule for municipalities.
Let's focus on the 11th schedule and the panchayats first. What kind of environmental functions are listed there? We're talking rural India now.
The 11th schedule contains 29 items, and many of them are directly relevant to environmental management at the village level. For instance, Item 1 is agriculture, including agricultural extension. Item 2 is land improvement, implementation of land reforms, land consolidation, and soil conservation.
Soil conservation right there.
Oh, what else? Item 3, minor irrigation, water management, and watershed development. Hugely important. Item 6, social forestry and farm forestry. Item 7, minor forest produce. Item 8, small-scale industries, which can have local environmental impacts. Item 11, drinking water. Item 12, fuel and fodder.
So water, forests, fuel, fodder, the core resources for rural life.
Definitely. Also, Item 23, health and sanitation, which includes waste management. Item 26, maintenance of community assets. Item 27, public distribution system. It's a broad list, giving states the constitutional backing to empower panchayats to manage these local resources and environmental concerns.
The schedule lists potential functions, right? It's up to the state legislatures to actually devolve these powers.
Yes, that's the critical point. The Constitution provides the framework and the list, but the actual extent of devolution, the functions, funds, and functionaries varies significantly from state to state based on their own Panchayati Raj acts.
So the potential for grassroots environmental governance is huge, but the reality depends on state-level commitment.
Precisely. But the constitutional mandate is clear. Empower panchayats for preparation of plans for economic development and social justice. And these listed items are the tools for doing that, many with a strong environmental component.
Now let's turn to the cities and towns, the 74th Amendment and the 12th Schedule. What environmental responsibilities are envisaged for municipalities?
The 12th Schedule lists 18 functional items for urban local bodies. ULBs, again, many are environmental. Item 1, urban planning, including town planning. Item 3, planning for economic and social development. Item 5, water supply for domestic, industrial, and commercial purposes.
Water supply in cities is a massive challenge.
Indeed. Then, Item 6, public health, sanitation conservancy, and solid waste management. That's a core municipal function with huge environmental implications. Item 7, fire services. Item 8, urban forestry, protection of the environment, and promotion of ecological aspects. That's quite explicit.
Protection of the environment itself is listed.
Yes. Also, Item 10, slum improvement and upgradation. Item 11, urban poverty alleviation. Item 16, regulation of land use and construction of buildings. Item 17, public amenities including street lighting, parking lots, bus stops, and public conveniences. All these have links to the urban environment, quality of life, and resource use.
Similar to the panchayats, it's up to the states to actually empower the municipalities to handle these things effectively.
That's right. The 74th Amendment provides the constitutional basis for empowered ULBs, but the follow-through via state legislation is key. The goal is democratic decentralization, making governance more responsive to local needs, including environmental ones, in both rural and urban settings.
It seems the constitutional design tries to cover all bases: central oversight, state implementation, and grassroots management.
It tries to create a multi-level governance structure, but as we know, making it work smoothly is the real challenge.
And we saw one example of trying to make grassroots power real earlier, the Forest Rights Act. Can you remind us how that connects to this decentralization theme?
Right. The Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers, Recognition of Forest Rights Act, 2006 is a powerful example of operationalizing decentralization, specifically empowering the Gram Sabha.
The village assembly itself.
Yes. The act mandates that the process for identifying and verifying claims for individual or community forest rights must be initiated by the Gram Sabha. It gives the local community the first say, the initial authority over forest resource rights in their area. It's a direct empowerment mechanism rooted in that decentralization philosophy.
Taking power from, say, the forest department, at least at the initial stage, and giving it to the community.
Exactly. It's meant to correct historical injustices and ensure local communities have a stake in managing the resources they depend on, aligning with the broader goals of the 73rd Amendment, even though it's a separate central act.
So we have the constitutional framework, the division of powers, the decentralization push. Let's talk about the specific laws and bodies that actually do the work of environmental protection on a daily basis. What are the key acts that define powers and authorities?
Well, the big one, the umbrella legislation, is undoubtedly the Environmental Protection Act, 1986, or the EPA. It was enacted in the wake of the Bhopal gas tragedy and gives sweeping powers to the central government.
Sweeping how?
It allows the center to take pretty much all measures it deems necessary for protecting and improving environmental quality. It can set standards, regulate industrial processes, handle hazardous substances, and, importantly, it can establish authorities to carry out specific tasks. It can even override conflicting provisions in earlier laws like the Water Act or Air Act if needed.
Can you give an example of an authority created using the EPA's power?
Sure. A classic example is the management of coastal areas. The coastal zone management authorities, both the national one and the state-level ones, derive their powers directly from Section 5 of the EPA, 1986. They are delegated the power to issue directions, regulate development, and protect the coastal environment.
So the EPA is like a master key for the central government to create specific regulatory tools.
In many ways, yes. It provides the overarching legal authority. But of course, there are other very important sector-specific laws, too. We've already touched on some.
Right, like the ones governing resource extraction.
Exactly. The Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act, 1957 MMDR Act, is fundamental for governing mining activities. And then there's the Indian Forest Act, 1927. It's old, from the colonial era, but it still provides the basic framework for classifying forests, reserved, protected, village forests, and managing forest resources, which obviously impacts biodiversity.
But wasn't the 1927 Act largely focused on timber extraction and state control rather than conservation?
Historically, yes. Its focus was more on managing forests for revenue and timber. That's why the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 was such a critical intervention.
What was the main thrust of the SCA in 1980?
Its primary goal was to stop the alarming rate of deforestation by making it much harder to divert forest land for non-forest purposes, like industries, dams, or mining.
How did it do that?
Through strict centralization. It mandated that no state government could de-reserve any forest land or allow its use for non-forest activities without the prior approval of the central government. This effectively gave the center a veto power over forest land conversion.
And it also brought in the idea of making up for lost forest.
Yes, it also established a requirement for compensatory afforestation, meaning if forest land is diverted, an equivalent area of non-forest land has to be afforested, or sometimes twice the degraded forest area. It aimed to ensure no net loss, though the effectiveness of compensatory afforestation is often debated.
So we have this complex web. The EPA as an umbrella, specific acts for forests, both 1927 and 1980, mining, MMDR, water, air, plus the constitutional division of powers and the decentralized bodies.
It sounds incredibly layered.
It is. And this layering, while potentially comprehensive, also creates challenges in implementation.
What kind of challenges? You mentioned friction earlier. Well, think about it. The center makes a national mining policy under the MMDR Act. A company gets a lease. But that mining often requires clearing forest land, which needs central approval under the FCA 1980. The state government controls the actual land administration and faces local pressures, maybe from communities empowered by the Forest Rights Act via their Gram Sabha.
So multiple laws, multiple agencies, multiple levels of government, all involved in a single project.
Exactly. And the source material even notes that the central government often complains about the poor performance of state governments in implementing policies, including environmental ones. This points to failures in coordination, maybe capacity issues, or genuine conflicts of interest between development goals and conservation mandates. This is where cooperative federalism often breaks down in practice.
The system requires immense coordination to work, but the structure itself seems to invite bottlenecks or conflicts.
That's a fair assessment. The legal framework exists, but making the machinery run smoothly across union, state, and local levels, especially when powerful economic interests are involved, is the constant struggle in environmental governance. #BV. Concluding takeaways.
All right, that was a deep dive indeed, mapping the constitutional and legal landscape. Let's try to boil it down. What are the absolute must-know factual pointers for someone preparing for prelims?
Okay, rapid fire points. States getting principle. Article 48A, DPSP. State shall endeavor to protect environment. Citizens binding obligation. Article 51AG, fundamental duty to protect environment. Enforceable right. Right to healthy environment linked by judiciary to Article 21, right to life. Power division key union list items. Interstate rivers, entry 56. Regulation of mines minerals, entry 54. Major ports, atomic energy. Power division key state list items. Public health sanitation, entry 6. Water irrigation, entry 17, subject to union. Land, entry 18. Fisheries, entry 21. Power division key concurrent list items. Forests, 17A. Wildlife protection, 17B. Economic and social planning, 20. Union law prevails in conflict. Rural decentralization, 11th schedule via 73rd Amendment, lists functions for panchayats, e.g., soil conservation, minor irrigation, social forestry, drinking water. Urban decentralization, 12th schedule via 74th Amendment, lists functions for municipalities, 5 e.g., water supply, solid waste management, urban forestry, environmental protection. Forest Rights Act starter. The Gram Sabha initiates the process for recognizing forest rights under the 2006 Act. Key acts. EPA 1986 umbrella, FCA 1980 centralizes forest aversion, MMDR 1957 mine, Wildlife Act 1972.
That's a solid checklist. Now, moving beyond facts to analysis, what are the bigger picture insights, maybe for mains?
I think the main takeaway is the inherent tension and complexity within India's environmental federalism. The structure relies heavily on cooperative federalism, but the sources highlight significant friction points.
Where does this friction really show up?
It shows up clearly in resource management conflicts over mining leases versus forest conservation, disputes over interstate river water sharing, and the general challenge of implementing centrally mandated environmental norms, like EIA or emission standards, at the state and local levels. The central government complaining about state performance is a symptom of this underlying structural tension.
So just having strong central laws isn't enough if the coordination mechanisms between center, state, and increasingly local bodies aren't robust.
Exactly. The multi-layered system with overlapping jurisdictions, especially in the concurrent list subjects like forests and planning, requires constant negotiation, clear roles, adequate funding devolution, and strong institutions to manage conflicts. Implementation gaps aren't just about lack of will, they're often built into the complexity of the system itself. Balancing national standards with state realities and local needs is the perpetual challenge.
So the Constitution gives us the tools, duties, rights, lists, schedules. The judiciary sharpens some of those tools, like Article 21. Acts like the EPA and FCA provide specific mechanisms. But making it all work effectively really depends on that political and administrative coordination, right down to empowering the Gram Sabha as intended by laws like the Forest Rights Act.
That sums it up well. It's a dynamic system, not just a static legal text. Its effectiveness hinges on action and cooperation at every single level.
Okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on, connecting these threads. We know the Gram Sabha has the power to initiate forest rights under the 2006 Act. We also know the EPA 1986 allows for setting environmental standards, sometimes stricter than baseline norms. So here's the question. Could you imagine a scenario where a Gram Sabha, using its legal standing, doesn't just claim rights, but proactively proposes and demands enforcement of a locally specific, stringent conservation plan for, say, a vital community watershed or a coastal mangrove patch within their traditional boundaries, potentially setting standards higher than the general CZMA rules and demanding the state and central authorities recognize and support it? What would it take to make that kind of bottom-up environmental governance truly work within this complex legal system?
That's a fascinating scenario to ponder. It really pushes the boundaries of how decentralized power could interact with the broader regulatory framework. Definitely food for thought.
On that note, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into India's environmental constitution and governance structure.
Thank you.
We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into your source material.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.